was conditionally approved as well. And just to kind of remind you guys, we are still working on the sign ordinance update. We have looked at some of the comments that were made, and we're kind of going back and forth a little bit with the solicitor and trying to get our language all in a row before we bring it back to you guys. So we're not quite ready to talk about that yet again, but we will be bringing that back to you at some point. So that is still pending. And that's pretty much all there is of note for that.
Thank you, Nicole. Next on the agenda is bicycle parking. And I guess, Nicole, are we referring to you on that as well?
Yep. So just as a reminder, as you guys know, the last meetings that we have had, we have been talking about bicycle parking. We did take a look at the, oh, sorry, I didn't know what my screen said. We did take a look at the other 5 Center Region municipalities and provided you with some information from them on what they're doing, as well as a model bike ordinance from Change Lab Solutions and some other materials for the June and July meetings that we held, or I believe that was when we held them, yes. And at our last meeting when we met in July, the transportation planner for the CRPA, Trish Meek, who is also with us tonight again, gave us a good presentation and an overview about bicycle parking and everything that goes with it. And we were asked by the Planning Commission to come up with some ordinance language for bicycle parking. So Trish and I and other township staff have worked through and presented in the agenda materials some draft language that we think might be a good discussion point. We look at several bicycle-friendly communities, this little chart that I provided in the agenda, and Trish is going to go into a little bit more detail here in a minute about the research that we have done. But we did closely follow the Change Lab Solutions model, and at one of our meetings, the Planning Commission did mention that they did like the way Ferguson Township wrote some of their regulations, and they did regulate by use, and Ferguson Township also used Change Lab, so we followed kind of that same format. So that is the attachment that you have, is that draft language. We do have a few things in the rest of the agenda that we would kind of like to work with you, and as I mentioned, Trish is here again, so I'm actually going to turn it over to her, and she's going to give us a nice presentation and cover some of this remaining stuff in the agenda, so then we can have a discussion about what you guys think of what we have drafted for you, and where we might want to make some changes or some additions or subtractions. So Trish, I'm going to stop sharing this so I can pull up your PowerPoint.
Okay, great.
So I hand it over to Trish. Does anybody have anything they want to say now up front, or should we just let Trish do her thing?
Go ahead, Trish.
Okay, I think Nicole's going to share the PowerPoint, so that'll be the guide for the presentation. And I'll just say, I just got a message that my internet is unstable and they're doing utility work nearby. So if I cut out at some point, Nicole and I did go through the PowerPoint, so I think she can.
I'll take over if it's
Okay, so if I get choppy at some point, let me know. So if you want to go into, that's the wrong mode there.
There we go.
Okay, here we go. So as Nicole mentioned, we talked a little bit about bike parking at one of your former meetings. And so here we are in September. We put together a draft ordinance for consideration. So it's just a starting point. And as she said, we did utilize the ordinance that we had provided you previously as that starting point. So just want to review a few of the slides that we had the last time, just to reacquaint everyone. And if someone from CNET watches that wasn't at the last meeting, they'll know where we're starting at. So why do we need bike parking? So we need it because we want to encourage bikes for transportation. And it's really essential for people who travel by bike to have an end of trip parking. So they need to know if they're going to ride it, there's a safe and secure place for their bike when they get there. Also, it can serve as a way to delay replacing a car or a need for a second car. If you're close enough to what some of your destinations are, a bike can be a very viable form of transportation. And so the important thing is we really want usable bike racks when individuals get to that end point in their trip. So the ones that are shown here are great racks. So I'll just say the first one on the far left is inverted U. We have a post and ring, and then a variation of the post and ring. They're extremely supportive to the bike. It allows you to lock it in two places. They're extremely secure, difficult to take a bike from one of these types of racks. So I just wanted to highlight that in the graphic. Now, as far as types of bike parking, we all think, oh, well, you just park your bike. But there's really, when it comes down to ordinance writing and requirements, there's two types. There's short-term and then there's long-term. And I'll explain those in the next slides. So for short-term bike parking, it's generally short-term visitors for up to 2 hours. So if you're coming to a destination and you're not going to stay for a long period of time, we call it short-term. They really need to be visible from and close to the entrance of the building, so less than 50 feet, weather protected and covered when possible, because no one likes to come out to a wet bike. And they need to be secure, sturdy, well anchored, and visible. The rack here that's shown in this picture is at the COG building. We installed these to put our 2 COG fleet bikes, and they are a Darrow brand rack. And there's many types of racks out there. They vary in cost based on the types of materials and finishes that are on the rack itself, but this is just one example of a type of rack. So long-term bike parking is really all about security, weather protection, and you're leaving it there for more than 2 hours. So long-term storage in many cases. So it can be a room in a workplace or a residential building. It could be within a parking garage, or it could be bike lockers as well. So there's many different ways to provide long-term bike parking for individuals at their end destination. And so I know that Nicole said this, but I just wanted to reiterate that the Change Lab Solutions model by parking ordinance is what we started with. It was adopted by Ferguson Township as part of their bike parking regulations. I know they're going to change a few things, and they're looking at some minor edits to that ordinance as well. But what we put together for your consideration has short-term, long-term, and the basics are number of spaces for each of those types of uses. The reason that we went to use was because it's just easier. We all know what a grocery retail store is, or a restaurant. They're easily identifiable. We know we could not define every conceivable use, but the draft ordinance allows some discretion for staff to find the closest type of use when determining bike parking as part of a land development review. So we went a little bit further than Ferguson, any of the ordinances in the region, and that Change Lab ordinance. What we wanted to do is we wanted to look at bicycle-friendly communities. So these communities are awarded for their efforts in creating a more bicycle-friendly place. An announcement was made last week related to Patton Township becoming a bronze level bicycle friendly business. We have the shield at the end of the presentation, but these communities stand out as ones that do things to make biking easier and safer for their residents. So we looked at Burlington, Vermont, Davis, California, Boulder, Colorado, Fort Collins, Colorado, Madison, Wisconsin, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Portland, Oregon. All of them very unique in the way that they handle things. All of them have at least one major university, which we thought was important. And we looked at a range of populations. It's really difficult to find someone that's exactly like Patton Township. And even if we did find a community that was exactly like us, we know that we want this ordinance to work for Patton and be uniquely your ordinance. But in doing the review, we found a number of things about the way the ordinances were put up that we liked that were different than the Change Lab ordinance. So if you want to go to the next slide, Nicole, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the definitions and the things that were in the agenda itself, but I'll also talk about some of the things we're recommending as we go through the rest of the presentation. So you already have, and this is the tricky thing about ordinances, you can't contradict what you already have included as a record ordinance in your municipality. So you do have some current bike parking definitions, such as bicycle parking space, sheltered is one of the definitions that you have, and we would be recommending from a staff perspective to tweak that to turn it into your bicycle parking long-term. Bicycle parking short-term is in there, bicycle rack and parking garage, but there's some definitions that we also recommend that you add. And when you look through the draft ordinance, you can see the definition section in there. If you want to go to the next slide. Okay. So bike locker is something that was not previously mentioned. In-street bicycle parking, major renovation and new development. And you might be wondering why in-street bicycle parking and parking garage parking are in there as a garage or a parking structure as a standalone entity. And the reason is that we know that things change over time. So we were looking in those model ordinances in those other communities that these were included there. Where it doesn't currently exist right now, current day in Patton Township, with all of the town center development that is proposed and future development trends that we're not even aware of yet, we thought that having those types of clauses and conditions in the ordinance was just putting us in a better place in the future if that type of development and parking becomes available. Now, calculating bike parking, and this is where we start talking about things that are different that we're recommending. So if you compared the two ordinances, that model change lab solutions ordinance and what we put before you, the model ordinance uses different formulas for short and long-term parking. So you would have a use, and there would be a formula to calculate short-term parking and a formula to calculate long-term parking. But what we liked about some of the other ordinances, such as Fort Collins and Boulder, and I think potentially Davis had this as well, is that there's a single formula that calculates a total number of bike parking spaces, and then you use a percentage to calculate short and long-term parking spaces. So from a formula perspective, it's much easier. You're running one set of numbers, and then you apply a particular percentage to it. And we think that it actually simplifies the process. And when I did speak with Ferguson Township, the Ferguson Township Planning Director about their ordinance that has been adopted, she liked the idea also of using percentages rather than two separate formulas. It's just easier to calculate the numbers immediately. Now with multifamily buildings, I will just say that we are recommending a per bedroom calculation versus a per unit. And when you look at that change lab ordinance, you'll see that there's, if you have a copy of it or if you've reviewed it previously, there's areas that are contained within parentheses. And those are the variables that you're allowed to choose to fit for your community. So there is some flexibility there. We think that using bedrooms as a calculator, it gives us a more adequate indicator of the number of bike parking spaces that will be needed because we actually have a better count of how many individuals will be living in that unit. And currently, what we've seen with multifamily building development is that trends point to an increase in the number of bedrooms per unit. I can remember when I moved here many decades ago, many apartment complexes might have 2 bedrooms, but we didn't know how many individuals were living in that unit as a whole. I mean, the census could help us, but we couldn't pinpoint actual areas because of privacy rights. But we now know that with these bedroom calculators, the way the developments are coming in, each individual generally in newer developments has their own bedroom. So that would be 1 individual per bedroom. And so that's why we're recommending that as a calculator. We also found that when we were looking at the ordinances that there's generally a minimum number of 4 bike parking spaces per use proposed. So if you ran the equation and it was a small business, the number that you would put, if it was less than 4, you'd be required to have 4 spaces. And this is to encourage bicycle use. You know, riders really need to be confident there will be a safe and secure place to park when they do arrive. But there is an exception for agriculture in the draft ordinance. And we did see this repeatedly in others as well, that when you think about agricultural uses, is it common for someone to commute by bike? It may happen. Do we see a lot of travel to a typical agricultural farm or agricultural use? It could happen. There may be an accessory use such as a store, and in that case we might qualify it as retail to calculate the number of bike parking spaces. So it doesn't mean, it means agriculture as a use, not the use on that agricultural property. So there would be opportunities to potentially capture spaces, if there was a, a farm to table or a sales stand there, it would be at the discretion of township staff when that development came in to make that determination. So when is bike parking required? And if you looked at the model ordinance, you see that there's two types. There is a major renovation. So if somebody's doing a major expansion to their facility and it's not required because of a federal requirement such as ADA accommodation, or there was some type of damage to the building done, at least proposing that some additional bike parking would be required. This is a way for us to capture and catch up for some of those uses that currently don't have bike parking or not enough bike parking. We also, with the land development plan submission, it would also trigger the bike parking requirement. And when you think about it, we always require parking, automobile or motorized vehicle parking with land developments. All we're doing is adding another layer to ensure that we're capturing bike parking as well. And we know we're a community where we have a higher ridership in the center region than other areas of the state and other areas in the country. And we know that people want to ride. And I'll just throw in there that the other day, I was driving down Atherton Street and I came to the Walmart and signalized entrance, actually on Atherton Street, and there were two individuals on spin bikes. So now that Penn State University has launched a new e-bike bike share, we know that people can and will go further than they did previously with the traditional Zagster bikes. So it was just evidence that the reach for those that are biking is actually a greater distance now than it was previously, just because that technology is there with e-bikes. So we wanted to just give you some examples from Patton Township so that we could show you examples of uses that are already in place or one that's coming. It's very close, we believe, to opening, and the number of spaces that would be required based on the size or the number of seats in that particular use. So we'll run through these and we can come back to them to answer questions. So for a multifamily building, we picked the View because this is a recent development, relatively recent development in Patton Township. There are 584 bedrooms. If you apply the draft ordinance, the number of bike parking spaces that would be required would be 292. So this was modeled after the Fort Collins ordinance that requires a half a space per bedroom. So these are the kinds of things that this is a starting point for us. Some communities, Boulder, Colorado, requires one per bedroom. They do in Boulder probably have a much higher bike rate there, but depending on where multifamily buildings are located, it might be the perfect opportunity to replace automobile trips with bike trips if people have secure locations to bring their bikes and use them. So the short-term requirement would be 73. So again, those would be the individuals that would be there typically less than 2 hours. So visitors or, short-term parking, and then long-term in this case would be 219. The next use would be a typical office building. So we picked the Hawbaker building on the corner of Colonnade and Wattle Road. That's pretty prominent. We all know where that's at. That building is 29,000 square feet, and the bike parking spaces that would be required under the draft ordinance are 8, with 4 short-term and 4 long-term. Now, we didn't have time to go out and look at all the buildings to determine what actually exists there now, if anything. And I can honestly say I don't remember if the Hawbaker building does have bike parking at it, but it's something that we could look at. If you want to have follow-up questions or want additional information as we head into the next meeting, we can do that. Next slide, Nicole. If
Do you not see it? It's Target.
Yeah, general retail Target might be my internet connection as well. So Target itself, the footprint of that business, not all of what's located in Colonnade, is 126,917 square feet. I think that's how we calculated that, correct, Nicole? That's just the Target?
Yes.
Okay, so the number of bike parking spaces that would be required would be 26, with 21 long-term, short-term, and 5 long-term. Reason is that, you know, with this kind of retail, people are coming and going. There actually are some bike parking spaces to the right of the entrance when you're facing the store. I think there's the circular loop kind that generally have fallen out of favor with the bike community, but there are some spaces currently there. But when you think about the volume of trips that could be generated, and more people are using cargo trailers or e-bikes so that they could transport goods. It's just looking into the future about what might be the best way to handle or to actually try to reduce the amount of motorized vehicle trips. So Aldi, and this is the one that I would say that it's not yet on the ground, but it's coming. So Aldi, which is located in Patton Crossing, right now there's proposed 7 spaces. So if you look at the land development plan, you'll see that there is bike parking proposed. It's 20,422 square feet. And the number of bike parking spaces that would be generated out of this ordinance, the draft ordinance recommended, is 9 spaces total, 8 short-term and 1 long-term. So an example of a restaurant that we chose is Cracker Barrel. So it's 8,960 square feet with 9 bike parking spaces that would be required under this ordinance, 8 short-term, 1 long-term. Just waiting for the slide to progress. Patton Township's Municipal building. Here's a great example because we do cover these types of civic buildings in the proposed ordinance. It's 18,880 square feet. There would be a bike parking requirement of 4 spaces, 3 short-term, 1 long-term. Grays Woods Elementary School. So it's 56,184 square feet. Required bike parking spaces would be 19, with short-term being 15 and long-term being 4. I was unable to locate some photos I have of Grace Woods Elementary. As you know, this is a perfectly located school for kids to ride and walk. When the school originally opened, there were so many extra bikes that there was not adequate bike parking, and I know that they actually obtained free bike racks from Center Bike, which is the bike advocacy group for the area, and I do have pictures of those bike racks, and they're completely full. So as a follow-up, we could even provide you information about how many bikes might be the max number there. We could reach out to the principal or the maintenance supervisor for this facility and probably get some of that information for you as well. And this, again, is a location issue. Because there are facilities that lead to the school, people are actually more likely to ride to the school, and that generates a need for bike parking. And what we know is that Patton Township has adopted a bicycle and pedestrian plan that outlines adding additional bike facilities and connections throughout the community. So we do believe that we will see more demand over time. Now, for theaters, there's also it's a use category, and the recommendation is to base the amount of bike parking on the number of seats. So there's 1,350 seats in the College 9 Theater in Patton Township, which would generate a need under the existing ordinance of 45 bike parking spaces, all of which would be short term. Slide, so there must be okay. And so then there's also a category for parks as well. So it's the Burnell Park, for the structures that are there, it's 1,656 square feet. So it only trips the threshold as a minimum based on the structures of 4 bike parking spaces. So short-term 2, long-term 2, which is the minimum in the ordinance, as I described a little bit earlier in the PowerPoint presentation. But really, these parks are municipal facilities. So I think that, we would be looking at them from a perspective of your parks Recreation Advisory Committee would be looking at them to determine if additional bike parking was needed. And so we just wanted to open it up for discussion and questions. I know that the ordinance is rather detailed in nature. One of the reasons that there is so much detail in it is it takes negotiation out of it's no longer a factor. So it's very easy to point a developer to the ordinance and say, these are what the parameters are. So we don't have to say, yes, we need you to install a sign to direct people to the parking, because the ordinance talks about exactly what that sign should be. Talks about what size the sign should be, how far away the bike parking should be, what kind of surface is needed. That we need details as far as bike parking when land development plans come in. And these are definitely all things that by those communities that are identified as being the most bike friendly, bike parking is one of those issues that the League of American Bicyclists repeatedly brings up in our review when, as the center region, we have applied to be a bicycle friendly community. They'd like to see us come up with standardized bike parking regulations. So one of the reasons that we're working on this is that Patton is the first that we're going forward with this model and this approach, and we're hoping to work through the issues with you and then take it to all the other municipalities for consideration as well. So I don't know, Nicole, if I missed any major factors that you want to review or how you want to proceed from here, but.
No, I think you hit all the main things. Let me just grab the agenda real quick, because there might have been one item that we could talk about. But I guess at this point, if the Planning Commission has specific questions or things that they want to talk about, we can start with that and then work through some of the other details in the agenda.
Go ahead, Jim. Mr. Payne, go ahead. You're on mute. Hang on, you're still on mute.
If I can unmute you.
Perfect. Take it away.
When you were looking at some of these other cities, you mentioned Fort Collins and Boulder. Just out of curiosity, since I grew up in California, what was Davis, California requiring? Because Davis has been a bicycle community for decades.
Oh, I don't
Not
have
to
it.
mention, that's actually where I got my undergraduate from, and my mic is not working, is it?
I can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me, okay. Yeah, I actually graduated from UC Davis. That's why when I see that there, I sort of shake my head going, the issue that Patton Township has is not bike parking yet. The issue that we have is not having safe roads that can be ridden on or safe paths that can be ridden on. So I'm more of a wait and see type of person until the paths go in, because then we'll see people actually having a reason to use their bike. I mean, if it's not safe to bike to the place where we've just required them to have bicycle parking, only the very, 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 very hardcore riders that are currently riding now, which we currently have bicycle parking for, are the people that are riding. So I would like to see us look towards getting bike paths and roads in place and infrastructure in place before we, really start requiring people to build large bike garages, bike structures. And this is somebody that went to UC Davis and has experienced all the Davis amenities of bike parking and riding. And I'll tell you what, it's night and day difference between Patton Township and UC Davis and Davis and the ability to ride. And, I'm for bike parking. I am for bicycle riding, but what's keeping me off the roads right now is that we don't have the roads that are bicycle safe.
One of our, the one thing that we just, from a perspective of putting the ordinance in place, we do know that after the development goes in, it will be extremely difficult for us to get the parking.
Correct.
In some way. And Davis was one of the ones. I will say, Nicole did the full review of that ordinance. We did not go full-blown Davis, I'll just say that, because we are aware that it's, those communities are very different from us. So it's just something for us to look toward from a perspective of how are they doing it and just start the conversation.
Go ahead, Bill. Did you have something more to comment on?
Yeah, I was going to say also, being from Davis, I'll tell you what a big chunk of the riders were doing in Davis that actually cared about their bikes is they all went inside. None of us at the apartment buildings ever left our bikes outside, and those that did frequently were stolen or vandalized. And it really didn't matter if it was what the type of bike parking that was available. Now, I'll admit, the bike parking that they had available was just the most horrendous sort of, you stick your wheel in, somebody knocks it over, and you've got a tacoed wheel instantaneously. But we just got done with a football game. We, at the fire company, had somebody's bike stolen off a bike rack. So, I mean, and it was locked up. The chances are people that have good bikes, especially e-bikes, which are in the thousands of dollars, are going to be parking them inside. So I understand the idea of wanting to have developers, apartment developers put in the bike parking. The issue I also have is, again, we're dealing with, it snows here in State College. It doesn't snow in Davis, California. Now, I haven't been to Boulder, Colorado, so I don't know how their stuff works out, but I suppose that we would probably see the bike barn or something like that. And, I would like to see bike barns, but at the same time, I want to wait until we have, the streets before we're telling developers, regardless of what's going on, that, that this is coming. If there's no street, and if, we're the people in charge of the street, unless of course it's PennDOT, I feel like we're putting the
Cart before the horse.
right now. Yeah.
Okay. Bill, if you don't have any other comments, Rich would like to weigh in. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So first of all, I agree with Bill in terms of, getting the bike path infrastructure in place. I know that there was an attempt on Devonshire to try to make that, bike friendly, and I think that's great, but there are some areas, I know out towards Grays Woods, there's not 100% bike access everywhere. The question that I had for Tricia is, only because I work for the school district and I wanted to make sure that I had the accurate numbers, is, so according to the ordinance proposal, schools are placed under civic, and it's 1 per 3,000 square foot. And it says in the chart that short-term is 80% and long-term is 20%. Did you say that Grays Woods is 56,000 square feet, or did I read that wrong?
I don't have a copy of the PowerPoint. Do you, Nicole?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm all digital, and I only have one screen here.
Grace Woods Elementary is 56,184 square feet.
Okay. And how many bike spots do they have currently?
That is the one thing I didn't have time to check on, but I know that they have taken and they've added additional racks. And I actually have photos of bikes just on the ground because there's not enough bike parking there.
I have 2 colleagues that I work with, and somehow they found out that I'm on the planning commission through a couple of roadies, and their kids go to Grays Woods and they live in the adjacent neighborhoods, and outside of the crosswalk situation, with getting, traffic management in place, the other thing that they talked to me about is the amount of bikes on the ground and the lack of security for their kids to take bikes to the school. So I was just trying to get the accurate data, from what you presented.
Yeah, and what I can do is I'll reach out to them, and we could actually go out there and just count the number of racks. And what's interesting about bike parking is it's not always very, people don't always park correctly at certain types of racks. So we can count them based on the type to determine what really is the maximum capacity and get you that information for the next meeting.
I think from, going back to what Bill said, I'm in agreement. But I think just speaking from what my colleagues have told me in terms of the path that their children take to go to the elementary school, from what they've gathered, I mean, I know nothing's a perfect scenario, but from what I've observed and from what they've told me, because of the adjacent developments in the traffic circle, the path structure, from what they've said, is safe. It's just the amount of parking, isn't there for all the bikes to accommodate everything. That's at least what they're telling me is kind of exactly what you're saying.
Thank you, Rich. So Trish, Sharon, did you have any comments?
Well, actually, I do.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Okay. I think it's good to get some things as far as ordinances go for development, but I agree we have to have safe paths, and a lot of our roads have like a shoulder of about 6 inches, which is, full of gravel and stuff in the spring through halfway through the summer from, just the climate that we live in and getting traction on the roads and things like that. But there are some types of businesses, like I think schools, we could probably put ordinances in place for, and civic buildings, we could put ordinances in place for. But a lot of those types of businesses that you were showing, I don't think that there's really a need for them. Like, I don't think most people are going to ride their bicycles out to eat to a restaurant, especially in a large strip mall right off the freeway situation. Or I don't think very many people, it's nice to have a few bike racks at a movie theater, but most people are going to go to the theaters probably at nighttime. So I don't think that putting a requirement there, I think we could put stuff in place and make a suggestion, but businesses, I think, have to make the decision for themselves. Are our customers or our clients need these things? Then we'll put them in place and it makes good sense. But I don't think we as a township should be insisting that they do that. I mean, it seems to me we should leave that up to like the market. Let them decide what is best for their customers, and we can make suggestions as to numbers that they might want to consider, but I don't think that we should require that.
Anyone else want to comment? I have some comments I'd like to share, but I don't want to. Bob, did you have anything you wanted to say? I'll go ahead, and maybe you'll think of something. So, Sharon, Trish, I feel incredibly grateful to have you in the area, and I feel as though, as a township, we've made such great progress with our bike trails, and the connectivity is really made some significant strides, particularly along Valley Vista. And then a year or two ago, along Circleville Park, connecting it to Gray's Woods. So kudos to everyone's efforts in that capacity. And then from a real estate standpoint, I've always, I'm actually now used to it. The incoming faculty, their emphasis on biking to campus is significant. It's more than I would have guessed it to be the case. And I feel like in the last 5 years, it just continues to be more of an interest. So I believe that our strides to make us a bicycle-friendly community is necessary, and necessary to keep us competitive with other towns and universities. And then in terms of the requirements for developers, I look at that a couple of ways. One of the ways I look at it is when local people go to Target, Dick's Sporting Goods, Applebee's, wherever they go, truthfully, probably 75% of the tax dollars, or the revenues, I should say, are going outside of the area. And for that reason, if we're saying as collectively to, for example, Target, of all that you're developing, we would like you to put in a few extra bike parking, I'm okay with that ask, because in my opinion, the money's going out of the area anyways, so why shouldn't the local Patton Township resident have benefit from being able to bike there. The other question, Trish, that I am curious about, when we do, in these other communities, when they impose bike parking, are they compromising to the vendor and saying, all right, if we're going to require parking, bike parking that, goes from here to 40 feet in that direction or 20 feet, are we then lessening the amount of vehicle parking?
Not in the proposed ordinance. Now, there are some communities that incentivize it to get additional bike parking by reducing the load on motor vehicle parking, but that is not proposed as part of this ordinance.
Okay. And then can I get back to the development? The issue, Bill, that I have with not addressing it is there are times when communities, take Patton Crossing, that's 26 acres. So I think the appropriate time to have a master bike plan with parking seems to be while it's being developed. Because my experience in the Planning Commission is unless it's required, it is not going to be granted. And anyone who questions that, we can look at State College and we can compare it to Altoona. Why does State College have a lot of extra bells and whistles when the same vendor is in Altoona and they don't have anything? It's because no one asked for it. So I'm of the opinion that on behalf of the residents of Patton Township, that the money that's being spent to develop is out-of-town money anyways, that I'd rather have the resident have the parking spot. So I'm fine with being in the minority on this, but it is my opinion that we should have an ordinance that requires it. Then my next question, Trish, is in terms of the retail, how is that defined? Like, for example, we take general retail. What's Walmart? Is Walmart grocery? Are they general retail? How definitive is these definitions?
Yeah, I think it's purposefully left general, and then it comes to the discretion of staff. There is a particular clause in there, correct, Nicole, that staff then will make the final determination, because it's a really good question about Walmart.
Yeah.
Because it is a grocery store, it is general retail, which do you apply to that particular use?
Yeah.
And if we get really specific, Nicole had put together all the potential lists of uses, and there were so many, there would be no way for us to come up with an ordinance that was even manageable.
Yeah, Sharon, I like your point, though. I mean, obviously things need to make sense. So if I'm whether you're in town or out of town investor, again, most of them are going to be out of town. But if you're developing a theater, and a lot of those shows are at dark, yeah, why would we require a bunch of bike parking? But my next question to you is, Trish, what is the long-term plan with in the center region for having these trails illuminated? Do we have a lot of the bike trails lit up at night? I don't know. I believe we don't, but is that a direction we're going in?
It's not something that's been brought up to date. So in PA, you're required after dark. So from dusk to dawn, you must have a white front light that illuminates, can be seen at 500 feet, and then a rear red reflector. But we ask people to use flashing red lights because you're more visible, and that's the requirement. So just like roadways that don't have to be illuminated, paths do not. Of course, in the core area where there's more traffic, there's generally street lights there.
Yeah.
But someone did bring it up along sections of the Arboretum Trail. So the old section of the rail bed that runs from Sunset Park over to Toft Trees. And, it's really about the character of the area. And that trail was not paved because Penn State wanted it to be a natural surface trail. So I can't envision that will ever have lighting on it, or at least in my time here. But that's not something that's really been at the forefront. It's been more about developing facilities of which bike parking is part of that.
I want
I
to throw
mean,
something
I
else out
know-
there on a different direction, but in terms of bike parking, and guys, I'm not proposing this, but am I correct that when we go through Harborville Circle, there's all those orange bikes? Is that the rental bikes you're referring to? There seems to be a bunch of bikes that are collectively together and they all look like the same brand. Is this the rental bikes we're seeing?
They're called Spin, and they are orange, but I'm not familiar, I don't know where you're referring to.
That's fine.
But
So
yeah.
I just know in town I see a bunch of orange bikes in the last week or so,
Probably
and I guess
them.
they're rental bikes. My question
Yeah,
to you is, how are they charged?
They-
You know,
They have battery packs that are swapped out, so there are Spin staff, that's the name of the company, that come in and they provide routine maintenance to the bikes throughout the day. So they know, they're very advanced
Oh,
equipment.
got it.
With little computer systems, so they know when those batteries need to be changed.
Yeah.
And it's an initiative by Penn State to put these types of bikes out there as part of their formal bike share program. And State College Borough has partnered with them
Got
for
it.
some limited stations within the borough as well.
Got it. So Planning Commission, considering that most of the development is from out-of-the-area vendors, why in our good conscience would we not require the out-of-town, the Targets, the Walmarts, and all the other national chain, why would we not require them to put in bike parking? And then the next question is, I think that collectively, it may work in our favor, because if communities are looking and retailers are looking for bike-friendly places, because I can tell you it's coming on the home front. I believe that it probably is, there's a connection from the commercial standpoint that maybe it has a synergy and we'll get vendors in here that we may not have gotten otherwise. But I don't want to be the only voice, and I believe right now, in the minority. What do we want to do moving forward?
I think ultimately, where there's a profit motive, there's somebody that's going to show up and make a profit. As far as this goes, I really do think we need more study, and we need to figure out what is it that we need to get to the point that we need bike parking. I want to get to the point where we need bike parking. Not, oh, we did bike parking and then we're going to have a bunch of developers that are going to look for every other way to get around it, rather than get the lanes in, get what's needed to get there, and get the pathways from the various apartments to the school. I mean, the big thing is I don't even know, does Penn State even allow students to bring their cars if they're living on campus?
Yeah, but Bill, the only mentality on that is, let's say we have a charter school that comes to the Patton Township in the next few years and wants to, build a school. In that scenario, we've created a problem. We know that we've had an issue according to you, Rich, we've had an issue at Grays Woods. So how do we collectively know that a dance school doesn't open up, another school, and we have no plan in place for parking? Why would we subject ourselves to repeating the same mistake?
And you've hit it on the head. Every single location that you mentioned says SCO or HOOL, school.
Right, so we need to, in my
Schools are the
opinion,
problem, so
bare minimum, we'd have to do
Target the
something to
schools.
address schools. To not have a parking ordinance in place at all doesn't, to me, make sense.
Well, can we just
And
do
then my
it?
next question is if you're talking if you're talking a $200,000 requirement of, they have to hit a $2,000 or $200,000 requirement on a renovation to actually get this in, when is it ever going to get done?
Good point. Is that accurate, Trish? Can you repeat that? Or say that again, please.
There's a section in the ordinance about major renovations. So it's on page 4.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if everybody has it with them or the PDF available, but it's under the table. And I'll just start off by saying, theaters seem over bike parked to me using that equation. So we were using what other locations had. They may have came up with those numbers based on theaters within like a core area. So all of the numbers are up for debate or consideration. But for the new development, and there it is, Nicole has put it on the screen now. If major renovation has an estimated construction cost of between $250,000 and $1 million, excluding the cost of compliance with accessibility requirements for individuals with disabilities under governing federal, state, or local law, and seismic or other structural safety retrofits. So that's the out. You didn't choose to do those renovations. So these are expansions and renovations that you choose to do. The number of bicycle parking spaces required by the section shall be reduced by 50%. However, minimum requirement of 2 short-term and 2 long-term bicycle parking spaces. So basically what it's doing is, if we allow development to occur now, and don't require bike parking, it will be very difficult to get it in the future. The only way under this ordinance would be if they undergo a major renovation.
Correct.
And from what we've seen, generally, the cost of bike parking is relatively small compared to that of some of the other amenities that developers are required to install. And Nicole and I did talk about coming up with a table of a cost for a typical bike parking bike rack that holds a certain number of bikes. And we can provide that to you so that you can see it. But generally, the cost of the racks are insignificant compared to some of the other things they need to do as part of a development and construction project. So
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of experience, because many of the ordinances, Ferguson's is relatively new in putting it in place. So I was around when the Colonnade at State College came in, and
Yeah.
we did, talk about, hey, where's the bike parking? How much are you going to put in there? And I think those were just small details
So-
to a developer that size from out of town.
So Trish, let's take the Colonnade. What bike parking do we have there today?
I know that there are some racks near the Target, and that it opened in 2000, so I'm trying to think about what's
Yeah.
on the plan. But we could go back, and if you give us, example locations, Nicole and I can research this before the next meeting and look at, in these particular areas, here's what we have. Now, we know that at Aldi's, we're going to get 7. The ordinance would have, I think it was required 8 or 9. But we could look at some of those locations and see, how this would impact them. Of course, multifamily is the most, that's the most dynamic area. And in college towns, many times, we have active individuals who have bikes that, because of the cost of parking on campus, they do use other modes to get there. And that's one of the things that generates that number. But the model lab ordinance did have a different, I can't remember what the variables were from this number to this number, but we could even look at that number as well. Change is, it's a draft, it's a starting point.
Bill, I always am sensitive to requiring more, more and more and more of people who are trying to, start a business and move forward. I'm sensitive to that. But sometimes it just, to me, makes a lot of sense to do things while we have 26 acres of undeveloped property to tackle it now as opposed to waiting. And let's not stop at Patton Crossing, because remember, that's going to, hang on. Patton Crossing is connecting right to another development in Ferguson, which opens up to Westerly. So it's perpetual. Mr. Payne, go ahead.
Yes, in talking about Patton Crossing's already been approved. So all we can do is ask. Same with Toff Trees West, whenever they get around to doing it, that was approved ages ago. But I'm more in agreement with you, even though we don't have the infrastructure for bicycles all over the township, we need something, at least minimally, as an ordinance for something that will come in. Because if they come in now before an ordinance is in place, they don't have to do anything.
Correct. Well, and my passion, guys, just so we're clear, I don't own a bike. I wish I did, but I don't have a bike. But I hear it from the incoming faculty. That is significant to them. And I really am serious about that. They really like to bike to campus. And I live in Park Forest, and I see a ton of bikers bike by the house all the time. So I'm seeing it both on my personal life, when I'm in my home, and I see it professionally. And I just see more of what surprises me, guys, and can we also the bikers, the people who bike to campus they don't care about they'll bike in bad weather. They throw these straps on their pant legs so their pant legs don't get caught in the chain, and they've got all kinds of gear to get them to and from. So I don't believe that this is a subject that only is applicable during nice weather. They're biking all the time. So I guess, what do we need to, do we want to make a motion to continue the conversation?
You don't need to make a motion. This is just a work session, so Trish and I are just going to take your feedback and continue to work on things to bring back to you at our next meeting. So it's really just about how much you want to give us to go on so that we can tweak it and bring it back to you guys.
Maybe
Okay.
as a starting point, we can get the information about Grays Woods Elementary. We can pull the colonnade plan, see what was required and what's out there. We can also look at Patton Crossing and just create a table to show you what parking is provided without an ordinance through negotiation.
Well, I will say, Trish, the MXD2 does have bike parking.
That's right.
We can talk more about that and what's written in there, and maybe we want to replicate that a little bit differently, as opposed to following what we've drafted tonight. We can try to find ways to work that language in that might make it more of a kind of a middle ground. We can revisit that. I apologize, Trish. I know we didn't discuss that part of it that much, but I did want to make that known that there is language in that zoning district about bike parking.
One thing
How well that works.
I would like to see if the communities that are requiring bike parking, are they being a little more forgiving with vehicular parking? I know that's not what we were thinking this evening, but I guess I'd like to know, do other communities require less vehicle parking?
Oh,
Because that was
Davis,
something else, Brian, with our next steps, that was going to be our, depending on how this conversation went, is to look at ways to incentivize it with a potential to reduce motor vehicle parking, so we can certainly spend some time pulling some information for that.
Bill, did you have a comment?
I was going to say Davis is very well known for being anti-vehicle. And the other question I would have to say is we really need to draw a circle around the places that we're going to say commercial, where we want people to have bike parking. And what locations are within 15 minutes, what residences are within 15 minutes that are most likely going to ride their bike there. And that's the other thing we need to know, is what is the threshold for the bicycle time? You know, Brian, you're telling me that professors are wanting to bike to campus. Well, are they within 15 minutes by bike, or are they all the way out where I am out here past Grays Woods?
Here's the thing.
That's
No, I can answer that, well, to some degree. The areas of the developments like Pantops, Ambleside, some of our Port Matilda neighborhoods would fare better if they were connected a little bit more so. Because, I mean, granted, that is a farther stretch. But what I find interesting is how far people will bike. And even Bollesburg, I'll have people who would, if given an option and it was easy, they'd bike that far. I think it's what I found interesting. So I've been doing real estate for 19 years, but in the last 10 years, it really, and particularly in the last 5, I just feel like we've got a lot more people that are really want to bike to campus, more than I've seen in the past. That's all.
Well, I have to say, I had never thought of,
Go ahead, Sharon. Go ahead. You got the floor.
I never had considered what you had brought up before, that the investment is like from these large stores are coming from out of state. So that is a really good point to consider, and they can afford it. I definitely feel like there's certain areas that we should definitely have, like for civic and for residential. I think those definitely need to be covered in, what's
Yeah.
the word? But I guess with retail and industrial, I mean, if most of that money is coming from outside developers, then,
What difference does it make?
yeah, that's true.
It's getting sucked out of the area anyways. Do we feel bad if Target had to put in some bike trails? To me, the answer is no. I don't feel bad at all. I feel a little bit better about it because the residents from Patton Township, whom we are representing, were able to bike there and park their bikes. That's my opinion.
And would we cover what types of, would we be specific at which types we recommend or which types we require of, because like Trish had said, I mean, a lot of the bike parking is, you know, it's not as well thought out, and people will walk away with part of your bike, if not the
Yeah.
whole bike.
Yeah, I think, Trish, Sharon, you're onto a good question, and that is, I do think we as a commission probably ought to have a little bit more knowledge of the cost. So if we're saying to these, whether it's an out-of-towner, which odds are it probably will be, or if it's local, if we're going to require parking, we probably ought to have an idea of what we're really asking from a financial perspective. I know it's probably a pittance compared to the whole project, but I still think that we ought to due diligence, probably need to have a little bit better idea of that, and make sure we have affordable options. You've done the homework on the pricing, but I don't think, we're not able to equate that to what is the real ask, you know? How much are we asking one to belly up in terms of money to put in what we would like to see happen? That would be helpful to have a little bit of insight on that.
Sure, we can do some more research on that.
Yeah, and it would be great if Patton Township could lead on this and help the other local municipalities and have us do it right so that it could grow. Any other questions on bike parking? If not, we can move on to our next agenda item, which is reports. Oh, hang on. We got one. Go ahead, Bill. Go ahead, Jim.
It's not directly related, but since we're talking about infrastructure and connections as far as bicycle paths and stuff, how's the talks with Penn State coming on getting a bicycle path towards Fox Hollow?
Great question. And the other Penn State comment was earlier in this evening is they would like the trails to be more natural. To me, more natural sounds like I would prefer not to pay to put in a real bike trail. But I could be wrong.
You need to they have to be paved.
I could be wrong.
There are people that feel very strongly. So many runners don't like an asphalt path.
Oh,
And so, for example, there's trails around the golf courses at Penn State. And when we constructed them on the old section of the railroad bed, we were not allowed to pave it because it was part of the Penn State cross-country meet course. So
Oh.
they can't run on asphalt. So sometimes there's reasons. I mean, people have very strong feelings about impervious surfaces as well. So it's always, you know, when we construct an asphalt path, the upfront cost is more, but overall maintenance for crushed limestone is more than the maintenance on the asphalt. So there's give and take when you're looking at types of facilities. A lot goes into the thought, and the municipalities have a lot to say, depending on the development. And then the question about getting the connection along Fox Hill Road, I think that Alex might want to weigh in on this because we had talked about to the property owner, correct?
Yeah, that part
Out near the curve.
the property owner part was complete, but Nicole was working on talking to Penn State. I don't know where that is.
maybe we can have an update on that at our next meeting. But very
Yeah.
good question.
I think we have
Jim.
to wait for the development to come through before a path would actually get put in. That's kind of where we're at with that, but I can double check.
Very good, thank
the
you.
status.
Okay, item 5, reports. Nicole, is that you?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Payne for this.
Yeah, Mr. Payne, take it away.
Well, I'll be blunt, there's plenty of material included with the agenda and on the attachments for the agenda.
Yes, there is. But you have the floor.
I'm hoping that you all looked at the 3 little videos, which are kind of an introduction to seeking public input. since a lot of the public felt like they were left out of the entire process when duplexes came about, even though we hold public meetings. But there's those 3 little videos. They're working on more. Our various groups have supplied input for the larger videos later on. I
So
think
so
Nicole
Jim,
has a better
if I can interrupt you now, so if we're a CNET viewer and we're watching this from home, and they do want to tap in and do as you have suggested to watch these videos, how does one do that? Are they on our website? How do you find the video?
I can answer that. So the videos haven't been, okay, so the videos are on the website. So number one, there's a housing task force page on the Patton Township website where the videos can be viewed. The videos are linked digitally to this agenda, and I believe they will be linked and available at the next board meeting next week. And we are working on a communications plan with Sophie Weston, the new communications specialist for Patton Township. Supervisor Teese and I are working with her on rolling out the videos to get them aired on CNET. And I do believe we are going to start seeing them aired by CNET, I want to say by the end of the month, beginning of next month. So they're going to start getting some more public airtime, but for now they are available and various links to different agendas and on the township website.
Does the township have a Facebook page?
I think they do now. And that, the social media stuff is going to be part of the communications plan, so they're not out on Nextdoor and social media sites yet, but they will be in the next few weeks.
Okay. Can they be put on Facebook or no? I don't know if they can. Can they?
Yes.
Okay. So CNET viewers, it looks like you can go to the website, Patton Township, could just basically go to the web or find the videos on Facebook or find the minutes. I'm sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there for people who are watching. Go ahead.
Not much else.
Okay. I think it'd be great, though, if we get more people engaged in watching the videos.
And I have them queued up. I can air them. It's about 7 minutes total for all 3. So I didn't know if we wanted to spend time doing that, or if you all watch them and now we've told the public how to reach them, if we would rather handle it that way.
What's your take, guys? Sharon, what do we think?
I am so technologically backwards, it's not even funny. I don't think I deserve an opinion.
That's not true at all. So guys, it's 5:45. The videos are, well, I'll tell you what, so CNET viewers, if you want to hang with us, you can, oh, wait a second. Go ahead, CNET.
I can just throw these in the meeting, and that way it's good quality, than rather than recording a screen.
Perfect. So we're not going to do it now. Instead, they're going to be on the meeting somehow. Pardon me? They're going to be in the edited version of this meeting.
Thanks, Matt.
Anything more, any other business? Item 6. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I motion.
And we have a second. Thank you, Bill. Motion adjourned.